very warm welcome to everyone joining us today on our webinar, which is for 1 hour focusing on using the Enhancing Assessment Framework to innovate practice. So before we kick off properly, just a few little bits of housekeeping. So we would ask you if you could please have your webcams off and microphones muted unless you have a question and we ask you to come off mute, just so that if anyone in the background or dogs barking or front doorbells going, we don't distract our presenters. We will be recording this session and it will be shared with you after the webinar has concluded today. Throughout the speaker sessions, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. And we have a designated time at the end for question and answer to our presenters today. And finally, if you've got any technical issues, you can't hear anything or you can't see, we've got Janine Shoopers from Advance HE on the call with us today. So please drop her a message and she will be able to help you. So in this morning's webinar, partly because it was early, I completely neglected to introduce myself. So welcome everybody, I'm Vic Stephenson and I work in the education team as a senior consultant at Advance HE. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Dr. Laura Sharp from the University of Glasgow, with Derek and Nicole from the Technical University of Dublin in Ireland, and by Tünde, Varga-Atkins and Sam Saunders from the University of Liverpool today. So we have 3 fantastic talks coming up. But before I hand over, I just wanted to very briefly contextualize the Advance HE framework for enhancing assessment, which is where the title of this webinar has come from. And this framework is one of a series of 9 frameworks plus an overarching framework that's been developed with and for the sector over the past 2 years, aiming at promoting and supporting student success in a variety of areas. And the frameworks were developed by identifying the prevailing themes that emerged from extensive literature reviews in each area. And they're intended to provide a shared point of reference and a common language to enable discussion, policy shaping, and the development of processes and practice around the broad and complex issues that impact student success. And each of the frameworks is structured in the same way, providing 3 perspectives: the institutional level, the educators, and the students. So within the Enhancing Assessment Framework at institutional level, the framework promotes a whole institution approach to shared responsibility in the development of processes and policies which support students, and in providing space and resource for innovative and future-facing assessment that's developed, shared with staff, and embedded within the curricula. And the elements within this framework that you're seeing on screen at the moment, these are the areas identified in the literature review as having the most significant positive impact on student experience and engagement with assessment and feedback. And from the perspective of educators, or Educators Plus, where we include that to recognise all staff, not just in the teaching space, that have a role in supporting student outcomes. And this framework promotes a holistic approach by course teams across the 4 areas of focus. And finally, from a student, the student element of the framework aims to enhance learning potential through improved assessment design. And this includes peer and self-assessment, formative and summative assessment, all of which foster academic literacy and good academic practice. And these interconnected factors not only enhance students' understanding and trust in assessment, but also involve them in authentic tasks that improve both assessment and feedback practices, enabling them to demonstrate their knowledge, skills, and competencies. And each of the talks today is aligned to one or more areas of the Enhancing Assessment Framework. And the aim of today's webinar is to demonstrate and showcase how different elements of this framework can look in practice. So I will hand over to our first speaker today, which is Dr. Laura Sharp from the School of Health and Wellbeing at the University of Glasgow. And she has a fantastic talk for us on the multi-pronged approach to plagiarism prevention and academic integrity training, which is aligned to both the calibration of academic standards and in the staff development quadrant, making sure staff development is available in a range of places and formats. So let me stop sharing and mute myself.
Okay, good morning. Give me a wee second and I will hopefully share. Is that working? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, good afternoon. My talk today is really to talk about the approaches that we're taking to plagiarism prevention, sort of across the school and across the university. I've included a note of my co-authors there. Hopefully, can you see everybody? Can you see right down to Eric at the far right? Yep. And they've all contributed in different ways. Dimitar would have liked to be here today, but unfortunately he is traveling to Bulgaria currently. So like many others, we've noticed an increase in plagiarism and suspect that some of the contributing factors are things like the pandemic, an increase in the online learning environments, and also the rise and evolution of GATE, so generative AI tools, I should say. At the University of Glasgow, we started to notice some distinct patterns within the cohorts of students who are presenting with suspected plagiarism. So what we've noticed is that postgraduate students are referred more frequently than undergraduates. It's more of an issue with our mature students than our younger students, and that the international and EU students are at higher risk of being referred than our UK. Make sure that we are supporting all of our groups of students, not just sort of any sort of specific ones. I think we can all agree that plagiarism referrals are a negative experience for everybody involved. Students find them really stressful. They don't know if they're going to be allowed to complete their studies or if there's going to be a potential impact on their long-term employment. For staff, it's really uncomfortable. It's a horrible conversation to have. We want to be championing our students rather than sort of giving them into trouble. And also, I'm sure it's the case for other places as well, but the referral process is particularly burdensome. So, in an effort to, sorry, that's all my setting the scene. I've forgotten to scroll. Yeah, so da-di-da-da. So, in an effort to support all of our student types, we've introduced this academic and originality and plagiarism resource. It's an interactive resource, it's evidence-based, takes less than an hour to complete, and it's self-directed and delivered asynchronously. Content's presented over 20 different learning steps, and these are divided into 4 sections. But some of the things that are included are details of the rules and consequences of plagiarism. The videos we include have got experts, so teaching staff's perspective, but also student testimonials about what they've learned and what they hadn't realised maybe about plagiarism. We've got quizzes, and we've also got game-based learning, which I'll talk a little bit about shortly. Okay, I'm going to let Dimitar talk.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to...
Can you hear him? Yes, is that working?
To present this work. Our academic integrity and anti-plagiarism training module is founded on 2 principal beliefs. First, the plagiarism is a complex, multifactorial issue, and therefore requires a multi-pronged approach to its prevention. And second, that instructional guidance should be tailored to the specific needs of different sub-cohorts, such as international students, postgraduate students, part-time students, and mature students. In our module, we have embedded 3 distinct approaches. The first one is a skills-based approach. Unlike a punitive approach, which is mostly focused on deterrence and compliance and views plagiarism as a moral and ethical transgression, a skills-based approach seeks to address the root causes of plagiarism, such as beliefs and misconceptions around academic integrity and related skills. While both approaches are essential to a robust plagiarism prevention strategy, we believe that a skills-based approach offers a more supportive learning environment that focuses on growth and development. The second approach is a consideration of culture. Our module views plagiarism as a transitional issue, including in terms of cultural transitions. And indeed, pedagogic research has shown that culture mediates many core beliefs around academic integrity and practices. Therefore, we have sought to address some of those culturally mediated beliefs and misconceptions so that students are aware of and reflect on them. For example, that copying other people's words is a sign of respect, or that even copying small amounts of information is acceptable. Importantly, we should not treat students from the same culture as a homogeneous group, but instead address and consider their distinct situational and diverse needs. And thirdly, we have addressed students' writing identities. Research has shown that students with poorly developed authorial identity tend to have an increased risk of unintentional plagiarism. Therefore, we have sought to enhance students' beliefs of themselves as authors and as possessors of significant original ideas, which has shown to enhance their self-confidence, efficacy, and ownership of their writing, which in turn is likely to reduce the occurrence of plagiarism. Thank you.
Okay, back to me. That's Dimitar over. I should say that Vic has shared the link to this presentation. It's a live presentation, so any updates or changes that I make will be visible, and the links within it again will give you access to them. So you're more than welcome to catch up with me later if there's anything that you'd like to discuss further. Okay, so next thing I'm going to talk about is the gamification that we undertook. So our learning tech could use AI to create a choose your own adventure style game. And we saw this as an opportunity to be innovative on a budget. He has the expertise and was a keen and willing supporter. And also to really just explore academic integrity in a different way with their students. So for the team, it was a really steep but valuable learning curve. And the challenges with using AI to create content was really interesting, but also a little bit unexpected. So our first consideration here was that we were really keen for our students and our characters we were using within this Choose Your Own Adventure to be relatable to our diverse student population. So what we did was we created two characters. We had Jamie, who was from the UK and identified as non-binary, and then we had Naveed, who was cisgendered male with Indian heritage. And we asked AI software to create images for us of Naveed and Jamie. And we realised we had to work pretty hard to refine the output that we got. As noted in the presentation, there is no offence meant by anything that I say here, so apologies in advance. But what we did realise that in an effort to actually to be inclusive and to demonstrate diversity, we actually had to challenge and also adopt some stereotypes in order to get a diverse output from AI. So you can see here we sort of our different conclusions, but in the final version, I would highlight that we'd added a tattoo sleeve to Jamie to try and sort of make him more UK based. It's pretty common for our students to have tattoos. Naveed, we had asked to have layered and baggy tops on, and Naveed, we could not get rid of this earring. It was determined, and eventually we had to Photoshop that out. So there were different things that we had to think about, but just not stuff we had really considered in advance. Next step was to think about the voices that we could use. This was something that people have said they didn't know, but AI can generate voices, and we're having that are actually AI created or using their voices. What we realised was we didn't like some of the voices. So this one here, if we play it.
After all, we've been aware of the deadline since the first week.
I think partly what he's saying makes him sound a bit smarty pants, but we didn't find him very relatable. We didn't like him. And then the next one,
I like the narrator.
Very robust.
So
robotic.
having audio for each screen is good.
Okay, so you can hopefully get an insight of that. So we then had to try a range of them and make sure that we were happy with them, and some of our student collaborators were happy as well. So we did this whole thing within a month, and just as we were getting to the stage of being ready to publish, Eric highlighted that you can now animate the images that we created using AI. So as you watch this video, watch the mug that Jamie is holding. Okay, did you see that? I'll do it again. So basically what we realised is that Jamie has grown a new arm and a mini cup. So we made the decision that the AI was not really refined yet enough to animate our full scenes, but instead we added just an animation of his lips moving while they talked, sorry. So just to give you an example, this was the situation that was in place. Jamie said, it's a really good article. To be honest, I haven't really needed to read anything else. And Naveed asks, aren't you concerned you're leaning too heavily on one paper? So this is our choice point.
No, because it's probably what other authors have found and are saying too.
So for some reason that's not working. They then say, that's a good point. Maybe I should read some other papers. I think my thing's fallen out. So the student makes the choice. The next stage is that they would get presented with a scenario or a choice of outcome that supports the student learning, and then leads them on to sort of, these are the risks and these are the reasons you would do this. So it's kind of reinforcing the student sort of experience in a different way. I've embedded the game here. It takes about 10 minutes to work through the 6 scenarios. So you're more than welcome to work through that. And if anybody's interested in engaging with it, taking it, borrowing it, then please do let me know. Okay. Vic also highlighted that practical applications are what she wants to do. So I've also just highlighted very briefly an innovative project that we've done, which is looking at AI as a student workshop. So this is a 2-hour session that we now run with our students. Trying to think, we are in the process. We've run this, I think it was in November, and we're now in the process of reviewing it to refine it further. But there is a link there if anybody's interested in seeing the different things that we're doing. So what this does is it outlines the university's stance on generative AI. It defines and then gets students to identify which types of AI they're actually using, so that they recognise that even just the spell check or the grammar check in Word is a type of AI input. We give them advice on how to track their AI use and document it. You can see in the photo there, we've got a competition where we actually encourage them to use Copilot, which is the university's choice of AI software. And we ask them to create a logo for the workshop using AI. And then we use that process to teach them how to report their AI use within assignments. So as I say, in this link here, the information's there. If people want to work through, you're more than welcome. And yeah, very keen for people not to reinvent the wheel. So if there's things that you'd like to sort of collaborate on or borrow, please just let me know. Okay. Just to finish off, really just the impact. We have a voluntary module questionnaire for the academic integrity and plagiarism module that's offered across the university, and basically all I think it's like 96%. I've got it written there. Yeah, 96% of students have said that they find it the resource useful. Anecdotally, we can say that there has been a reduction in inappropriate paraphrasing within assessment. And I would also say that the feedback from the AI workshop, we always try and use the cyclical improvement method. So we do take the feedback, and it's been very positive as well. I think just to finish off, what we are recognising is that we need to better monitor our plagiarism referral data, really to try and work out the reasons that people are being referred, and then that should then allow us to have a better understanding of the impact of the work we are doing, both over time and across the university. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Laura, for brilliant insights, and thank you so much for sharing that and making that available to everyone on the call here. So fantastic to see such a positive and proactive approach to supporting students rather than penalising students for use of AI. I'm just going to move on now and introduce our second set of speakers today. So a very warm welcome to Dr. Derek Dodd and Nicole O'Neill from Technical University Dublin. And they're going to be talking to us today about a project that they have led and embedded within the university on developing a learner and program focused approach to authentic assessment in consultation with PSRBs. And this aligns with the holistic program programmatic approach to assessment and encouraging students to, or supporting students to thrive on complex, authentic challenges. So I'll stop sharing and hand over.
Thanks, Vic.
Thank you.
Just need one moment to pick the right screen. Does that look okay?
Yep,
Okay,
all
thanks
looks
very much.
good, thank you.
I think it needs to be slightly smaller because we can't see the bottom. Sorry, Derek.
Oh, okay.
Ah, yeah.
How's that?
That's a bit better,
I
yeah.
can see fine, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Nicole, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Derek. So just to explain the project that we had was that we were working in consultations with professional statutory and regulatory bodies, also with academic teams and a number of teaching and learning experts from the UK as well, and with students. And the project aimed to develop a sustainable approach to embedding authenticity within assessment practice, with a particular emphasis on programme-focused assessment. Next slide, please, Derek. The origins of Professor Assess can be traced to our conversations that we had with our university lecturers and other partners to a previous impact-funded bursary scheme that were centred on embedding authenticity in individual assessments and to the dialogues and practice exchanges in our authentic assessment community of practice. With this project, our primary aims have been to support critical dialogue between programme teams and PRSBs on authenticity in assessment practice, to co-create a suite of resources to assist our teams to collaboratively develop programme-focused authentic assessment strategies, and to build on authentic assessment toolkit for use by our community of lecturers and our external stakeholders, which is aligned to our new CPD framework. Next slide, please, Derek. And I think you're going to take over.
I think this is me, yeah, and there's probably a bit of repetition here. So as Nicole mentioned, Professess had its origins in an earlier authentic assessment initiative, and that was sort of a twin track approach. So we had a scholar and supporter bursary scheme where 8 lecturers were seeking to develop more authentic approaches to assessment in one of their modules, and they were supported through a peer practice exchange by a more experienced academic mentor. And we also created, as Nicole mentioned, an authentic assessment community of practice, and alongside our small team of scholars and supporters, we sort of worked together to co-create a sort of shared language or a set of institutional guidelines and principles and recommendations for authentic assessment that were relatable to everyone and all the constituent disciplines and communities within our university. And that became our authentic assessment framework and definition. So the initial idea for developing, as Nicole mentioned again, this suite of resources that might support a kind of program-focused approach to assessment that was co-created with PSRBs and learners emerged from the kind of extended dialogues that we had with those stakeholders. And we were particularly interested in a program-focused approach because as opposed to the 8 great case studies we got out of that first project, they were ultimately a little bit isolated, and we wanted to look holistically at the entire journey of the learner through each program and develop a more kind of integrated and balanced approach. And that's our tie into the advanced HE framework there as well. Some of the impetus as well for Professess came from I suppose what some of our stakeholders and peers perceived as obstacles or impediments to innovation in their assessment practice. So in particular, there was a common refrain that surfaced in many of our conversations with partners about expectations of professional and accrediting bodies, and this was leading to a predominance of assessment by examination across our programs, making this kind of programmatic authentic assessment approach quite challenging for implementation. There was also a lot of discussion about contextual factors that limited innovation in assessment design decision-making. So those were, perceived difficulty navigating institutional policies and administrative procedures, departmental, disciplinary and personal norms and beliefs and conventions, the idea of the way things are done around here. And concerns were expressed about a lack of guidance, support, training and time, which I suspect is probably a universal challenge faced by HE educators. Nicole.
Yes, thank you, Derek. Our experience has also been that there has become a larger trend towards teaching becoming more individualistic and less team focused. There's been a number of contributory factors to this, which include the trend towards more module sharing across programs. So making common modules fit a program rather than looking at a program from beginning to end and how each student's journey will be within that program. So what we're looking for now is that because students are taking each module and they're sharing it with other students from other programs, it's more difficult to have those program-based team approaches. And there's also more difficulties on teaching staff to have this time to discuss how their modules fit with their colleagues, because there's more students taking each of these modules, there's increased pressure from students for pastoral care, and there's also more institutional reporting time. Next slide, please, Dirk. So with this project, we picked 4 partners. In the areas of architecture, electrical and control engineering, optometry and law, which are all very different discipline fields. Next slide, please, Dirk. All of these teams, though, even though they're quite different, all had strong, practically and professionally aligned and innovatively authentic tradition of assessment already in place. And therefore, we were able to adopt an appreciative inquiry or a collaborative and strengths-based approach, which focused on elements of assessment that were already working well, with a view towards co-creating resources and exemplars and guiding principles for authentic assessment that reflect these diverse perspectives, their pedagogical traditions and innovative assessment practices. In particular, we wanted to co-create resources that would support partnership and collaborative development between stakeholders, with a particular focus on evaluating assessments both at the module and programme level, and encouraging teams to work together to sketch out an integrative, balanced programme level approach to authenticity that aligns with the programme level outcomes. Next slide, Derek. So there was 4 main outputs from this project, which are listed here on this slide, and my colleague Derek is going to now take you through each of those deliverables.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so I suppose the first thing that we wanted to develop as part of this project, and we talked about, I mentioned the shared language before, was that we wanted the institution to have a kind of living definition of authenticity, because we don't want it to be fixed or static. We'd rather have it continue to evolve or adapt over time. So this has been through numerous iterations over the last 2 years, and it might sort of appear rather generic or deceptively simple, no matter, depending on what way you want to look at it. But under the waterline, so to speak, there's been kind of multiple extended debates about how we should define authenticity in our institution. And I won't take the time today to elaborate on every clause or word within that. But the crux of our definition is that we wanted to retain the focus on realistic assessments that develop learners' competencies for employment, professional practice, the more sort of, I guess you could say, traditional understanding of authenticity within the literature. But we also wanted to take a broader, more holistic view on the purpose of assessment. So the key term here being life-wide learning. And this is a kind of a term from the literature on lifelong learning that we perhaps malappropriated just a little bit to suit our own purposes. But for us, the point of using this language is that we wanted to highlight that valuable learning experiences and learning application can occur in lots of different contexts that cut across an individual student's life, whether in formal education settings or in the workplace. And we wanted our partners, when they're thinking about real world relevance and the application of skills and competencies to practical situations, to consider that learners may need to adapt to changing professions, in a changing world, and develop transversal skills that can be deployed in lots of different situations in life and in work. So we didn't want to be very narrowly employability focused. And our authentic assessment framework complements our definition. And this is intended as a kind of set of non-prescriptive guiding principles or dimensions to support lecturers and program teams who are embedding authenticity into their courses and programs. Very, very quickly, realism is where authentic assessments position learners in realistic situations or problem scenarios that have fidelity to the sort of complexities and challenges of professional, disciplinary, or life-wide contexts. Cognitive challenge, where assessments mirror authentic intellectual challenges, not just through that kind of task fidelity, but by requiring learners to engage their higher order cognitive abilities. Critical reflection, so students are given assessments that present them with problems or tasks that afford them, I'll slow down, opportunities to make choices about their approaches or solutions and the way that they apply their skills and knowledge. And feedback processes. Lastly, we argue that authentic assessment, we don't argue because a lot of this is taken from the literature. And I think if you're familiar with the literature on authentic assessment, there won't be anything too novel in here. But thankfully, this is something that all of these dimensions are agreed upon by all of our peers. Feedback. We wanted to engage learners in assessments that give them opportunities to provide and receive and enact feedback that resembles those kind of practices of their discipline, their profession, their workplace, or other life-wide learning settings. And this is sometimes referred to as authentic feedback. So our authentic assessment toolkit, it's very much a work in progress. It's a collection, it shouldn't be a work in progress because we've drawn down all the funding and the project is finished, but we won't get into those setbacks today. The resources are designed for use by individual academics and program teams to evaluate their existing assessments at either the modular or program level, and to work together to develop more authentic approaches. So it exists as a printed booklet, but there's also an evolving digital resource hosted on our website. We don't have a link to that today because I don't know that we're fully proud of it quite yet, but we're almost there. And that toolkit features a range of practical tips and associated activities that faculty can use to evaluate their practice. Some examples include authentic assessment rubrics, checklists, radar diagrams, competency matching and program mapping activities. We also have a range of exemplar authentic assessments from across the institution in different disciplines. Then we have workshop tasks, fully facilitated workshops that can be used individually and by programs to develop authenticity in a kind of integrated way across a continuum holistically within their program, a podcast series, which I'll explain in a moment, and a PSRB consultation guide, which is currently under development. One of the key elements, as I mentioned, of the toolkit are reusable slide decks and supporting materials. So we have two different models of workshop that we offer to our teams, or that they can use themselves and adapt to their own purposes. And these are a design sprint, which is kind of a half-day program-focused approach, and a shorter, typically 90-minute lightning decision jam, which is a term that we got from Google Ventures. We're not so naff as to name something a lightning decision jam, but it stuck. And this provides opportunities for program teams to engage. Well, both approaches, I suppose, are about structured brainstorming, rapid problem solving, and in this case, rapidly sketching out prototype assessments or program assessment strategies. And then, as I mentioned, another element of our toolkit, something that will be used as a learning resource within our digital badge, is an authentic assessment podcast mini-series. And across our 3 episodes, we focus respectively on exploring what authentic assessment is and how our understandings of it have changed, then how we might go about embedding it within our own assessment practice, and lastly, how program teams and PSRBs, again, that's professional, statutory and regulatory bodies, might partner in this space. And there's contributions here from our learning, teaching and assessment team, Professors Sally Brown, Kay Samble and Lydia Arnold. I think I saw Kay lurking there in the chat, so that's a shout out to Kay. And program team leaders in architecture, law and electrical engineering, and PSRBs in chartered surveying, engineering and legal studies. So they'll be hosted publicly online, but everybody has a podcast these days, so there's a lot of noise. Maybe they're not that good, but they'll be useful for our academics at least. And Nicole.
Thanks, Derek. So we can kind of conclusions from this project, where whilst there is a strong agreement that authentic assessment supports student engagement and development of personal skills that are required to become proficient life-wide learners, there are still several barriers to preventing further adoption of authentic assessment practices. These are listed in the slide here, but to highlight a couple of them, the time constraints and also perceptions that introducing authentic assessment can increase workloads. So we've tried to address that by giving tips on how new practices can be introduced without vastly increasing workload. Obviously, when you introduce something for the first time, there is a little bit of extra work trying to bed new practice down. There are also concerns related to academic integrity and the perception that invigilated examinations are the only way to ensure that the student is producing their own work without assistance. There's also still perceptions that PRSBs require high focus on these invigilated closed book examinations. And there's perceptions that quality assurance processes do not facilitate the changing of assessment types. And there's also the perception that there is an ease of administration around traditional examination processes, as opposed to assessments that need to be scheduled and spread out towards a programme. So we have a number of next steps that we're still continuing, and these include launching a new digital badge for academic staff to take in spring 2025, the launch of our public AA toolkit, which will have OERs embedded. We also have workshops we'll be running out with programme teams in advance of school reviews and programme reviews, and also further socialisation of our definition and framework. And as Derek mentioned, the PRSB guide is still in development. So we're hoping to continue to work with our professional and regulatory bodies to keep that dialogue open as to how we can enhance assessment practices. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us today.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much for sharing what is evidently a huge amount of work a huge project that you've worked on and implemented. And there's a lot of learning there. I'm sure that everybody is really keen to pick up with you and take forward in their own institutions. So we will make sure that contact details are shared where everyone is given permission to do so, and we will share slides with the speaker's permission also. So thank you. There are some questions coming through, which is great, and we will pause after our final presentation for today's session and give an opportunity for a bit of Q&A. So if I can just briefly introduce our final speakers for today's session, who are Dr. Tünde Varga-Atkins from the University of Liverpool, and her colleague Dr. Samuel Saunders, also from Liverpool. And they are focusing today on using generative AI in multimodal contexts to develop assessment. And if you're not familiar with Tünde's other work, which I'm going to reference after the presentation, Tünde has done some work with Advanced HE on implementing multimodal learning into learning and assessment practices, which is a fantastic resource that's available on our Knowledge Hub. But I will stop sharing and hand over to Tünde and Sam to talk about how their work draws on the diverse range of inclusive assessment instruments, use of technology to support assessment and feedback, and how getting students to contribute to assessment design promotes engagement and outcomes. Let me just stop sharing.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share the screen. 1 second. There we go. And we see that. Is that coming through?
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Tünde.
Okay, so thank you, Vic, for the lovely introduction. And with Sam Saunders and myself, Tünde Varga-Atkins, we're here from University of Liverpool. We're both educational developers. And as Vic said, we would like to share with you our work on generative AI in multimodal context to develop assessment literacy. And I will talk a little bit about multimodal pedagogies, a little bit about our project, and then Sam will talk about the case study on multimodal assessment literacy. So Sam, if you can, we're going to do a double act on sharing just in the interest of time. Thank you very much. So where we're coming at from, multimodality can mean many things for many people. Where we are coming at it from a semiotic perspective, and are very much interested in how we can use different semiotic forms to create meaning, and especially in the learning context, where we might, for instance, work with infographics, where we combine text and images, and through these different forms, we create new meaning. So in the image that you see here before, for instance, this idea, why we might want to do it in a learning context, because we can express something more that wouldn't be just possible with just one of the modes of communication without the other. We also talk about multimodal literacy. Is that something that we can develop in students, but also from a perspective of inclusivity. So we might also want to do multimodal learning and assessment because we want to draw on the multimodal literacies of our students and give them the flexibility to be able to communicate their learning. So we have also a few examples of multimodality, but I think Laura's wonderful talk first illustrated some excellent examples of multimodal learning, if you remember her animations and text-to-speech examples. But just from the guide that Vic mentioned before, we have some examples here as well, where Mary Jacob, for instance, gets her PG Cert participants to put together a Lego brickwork on their teaching philosophy. And in Isabel Winder, in the middle example, for instance, in the synoptic assessment of students in the 3rd year of biosciences, she gets students to select their own topic and any format they want to communicate their learning on that topic. And so here you see a student created a cross stitch, which I'm sure they will remember. They will never forget this, the learning that they have communicated through this. And in both examples, the very important aspect that goes together with this is the narrative or the reflection in which the student communicates what what and how that multimodal artifact expresses their learning. On the right-hand side, we've got a virtual reality example, and I think Laura's talk was also an example of that, in many cases, and I'm sure you're doing a lot of multimodal learning, teaching and assessment in your examples as well. Many of these examples will be digitally communicated. So let's just move on to what we are doing now. So currently what we're interested in is how we can use generative AI in this context for learning, teaching and assessment. So as we heard before, we might get students to express their learning in multimodal artifacts with the drawing on the help of generative AI tools. But similarly, we can also encounter, explore and evaluate, get our students to do these and maybe critique the outcome of a generative AI, whether it's text to video, text to speech, and so on. And as we heard again from Laura's example, these things are not perfect yet. So it's very valid to critique, to get our students to critique some of these outputs, is where the learning comes from, not necessarily the expectation that generative AI will just do it for us. Is how we interact with it and critique it is where the source of learning comes. Okay, so this is the sort of examples, and we have done a scoping review to just review how generative AI is used in multimodal context in higher education at the moment. It's a very fast changing area and very recent, so there's not that many published examples yet, but here you see an example where videos and animations were created as teaching aids in a particular Chinese style. Okay, so that's just an example. And then next we have our project, which is an interinstitutional project with a number of participants. Some of them might be here today as well, and it's funded by CEDA, and we are looking at the generative AI used in multimodal context. Okay, and our research questions are is what you see on the screen. So looking at what are the learning designs, how generative AI is being used in this multimodal context, whether it's for learning, teaching or assessment, some of the opportunities and challenges. And I think, again, Laura, you've exemplified some of those already. And we're also looking at the inclusivity, sustainability and ethical considerations when using these tools as well. But I let Sam to continue with focusing on assessment.
Thanks so much, Tünde. Yes, so the part of the project is for us to split into kind of smaller subgroups, each looking at kind of learning, teaching and assessment angles, if you like, to the project. And to develop a case study that we're going to run with our own students in that particular kind of pedagogic space, incorporating generative AI into a multimodal activity to kind of see the impact that it might otherwise have on the way the students learn, or the way they are assessed, or the way that they are taught. So to zoom in on the kind of assessment case study, this is something that we are essentially designing at the moment that we're going to run over the next semester, where we're going to ask students on an MA Victorian Studies module called Victorian Murder and Other Crimes to submit their formative assessment, which is essentially a formative essay, into Notebook LM and generate a podcast of the work, and then listen to it back and reflect on its kind of perspective that it presents. So to sort of ask themselves whether it focuses on the right kind of angle, whether it focuses on the right kind of argument, whether it focuses on the right type of area of the text, etc. To kind of see how effective and usefulness the exercise is, to essentially get kind of formative feedback from an external party that doesn't really kind of exist and doesn't really have a kind of vested interest in the work itself. So this is essentially creating extra meaning, if you like, on their own work using a different kind of form. So the student kind of, and we can also ask students to use Notebook LM to help better understand their assessment briefs as well. So we're going to kind of approach this from two angles, helping students to understand the actual kind of purpose of the assessment, what it's asking them to do, to kind of help develop their understanding of the task and how they complete it, how they're going to get feedback as a result of it, and then kind of using it within the context of completing the assessment itself, which they write ahead of the kind of summative part of it at the conclusion of the module. So they listen to the podcast that it generates and then reflect on how well it engaged with the work. and comment on how helpful it is in preparing them for the summative task. So that's the kind of description of the process that we're kind of undergoing, and this is how we feel it sort of helps touch on some of those angles of the framework. Obviously, it's a very kind of localized activity that we're doing with the students, and obviously that we haven't started properly yet, but we feel like it does kind of contribute to helping students to understand when they're going to get feedback and what it's going to look like, how technology can be used to support that, how it can be a dialogic process as well, how it kind of balances formative and summative work as well. So it has this implication for departmental approaches to assessment. If we think about assessment in this particular context, we can use technology to help students to better understand what it is they've got to do, and also throughout the process as well. And then from the students' perspective, we actually felt that it touched on quite a lot of the different areas of the framework as well. It helps to contribute to assessment design. Students will be helping to design the assessment and talk about how it actually works for them, how they better understand the assessment criteria, give and receive feedback in different kind of alternative forms, helping them to thrive on complex and authentic challenges as well. Is this how will you get feedback on your work if you're writing in a professional setting? You'll get feedback from someone you don't know or from someone you've never spoken to before, and then to kind of recognize and act on that feedback as well. They've heard it. How has this helped you to understand your work so far? Has it kind of done the thing you wanted it to do? What are you going to do next? So that's how it sort of touches on the framework for enhancing assessment. Sorry if you've got a black bar at the top of your screen, by the way. I cannot seem to get rid of it. Zoom, I think, is the word that sort of sums it up. The next steps for this particular case study really are for us to kind of get this going. So the assessment group is performing this case study on modules that start in January 2025, and we're also going to kind of discuss and present the case study and help have a kind of workshopping session as part of a symposium that we are hosting at Liverpool on the 21st of January 2025 as well. So do please come along to that if you can, and if you are interested. Post-implementation, we're obviously going to analyze the results from that, write it up, and then we'll include it in the wider generative AI and multimodal learning guide, which is the ultimate purpose of the project, which is for educational developers and educators who are interested in incorporating generative AI into multimodal pedagogic spaces. And that's sort of under construction by the wider project group. And I'm really conscious of time. So if there are questions or comments, I know we have a section for that. Otherwise, thank you ever so much for everyone, to everyone for listening, and I will stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tünde and Sam, for that fantastic presentation and kind of talk through of a significant project that you're doing to really enhance assessment within Liverpool. So we've got a few moments if anyone has questions. Thank you to Derek, who's been actually answering questions in the chat. But if anyone would like to ask a question either in chat or would like to just come off mute and ask any of our presenters from this morning, please feel free to do so. We do have a few moments before I wrap up and make you aware of some other potentially useful resources Advance HE has.
I mean, can I ask a question of Laura?
Of course, yes, please do.
So I was very interested in your example, and I thought the idea of student identity as authors that you've employed in your AI example and getting them to recognize themselves as authors was really interesting. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you've gone about that.
Okay, so probably our students as authors it's not as dominant in that particular resource as it is maybe in other things that we're doing. So one of the ones, a slightly different project that we're doing is trying to encourage the students to do change campaigning, which we also include AI into the process of it. So really sort of recognising where Glasgow sort of promises to create world-changing students. So one of the things we're trying to do is actually give them a really clear kind of workshop that allows them to go out and make these changes, to actually work out how to do. And they're encouraged to use the Sustainable Development Goals as their basis, identify an area that's really bothered them. So it's global mental health and public health that I work primarily with. And we're encouraging the students to actually really get involved, and they're taking the lead in developing the content and And, you know, if we have got feedback and we've maybe raised concerns that the staff found when they were running it, the students are then trying to, so it tends to be that the staff run it first time, and then we're actually encouraging the students to come in and run these sessions themselves with support, but really trying to empower them to take the lead and feel that they're developing some expertise. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, that's a lovely example. Thank you, Laura.
No, thank you.
Brilliant. Sorry, I'm just, I was just checking to see if there are any other questions, but I think they are being answered. There seems to be quite a lot of interest in picking up with people who are the speakers and the projects that they've been presenting today. So please do continue to connect. That's really the aim of this sort of, webinar series, is to showcase great work that's happening and also connect people with, you know, others who are working in similar areas and share their knowledge and expertise. So just to very briefly wrap up on, if you are interested in and working currently in the area of assessment and feedback, some ways in which Advance HE can support you or your institution are obviously through the consultancy work, the curriculum reviews, staff development, and resources that we have available, such as the assessment and feedback superchargers that came out of the development of the framework and are drawn from that literature review by Ed Pitt and Kathleen Quinlan. Just to signpost you to a couple of resources. I mentioned earlier Tünde's fantastic work on the multimodal learning practitioner guide. So if that's something that you're interested in looking more deeply into, there's a range of examples and practical tips and approaches on the website, which is linked there. We also have additional case study examples alongside the practitioner guide to enhancing assessment, which was co-written by a number of colleagues from the UK and Sweden, looking at areas drawn from that framework on how we can get students to understand the assessment, how we can get them to engage with feedback, how we can encourage co-creation, and how we can develop authentic assessments which showcase competencies. So there are some great examples being shared from across the sector available in these resources, and also that case studies compendium, which I seem to have difficulty saying that word, which is drawn from the Assessment and Feedback Symposium. We also have coming up, being recorded in January, so hopefully available on Spotify and Apple and whichever your podcast provider is. We have a podcast focusing on assessment and feedback with Professor Naomi Winston, Dr. Miriam Firth, and Dr. Lauren Woodlands from so we've got international speakers involved there looking at the challenges, what's working really well, innovations, great practice. So we're really, hopefully, great discussion coming up available soon. We also have the Introduction to Assessment Design e-learning course, which there is a link there if anyone would like to find out more. And finally, we do very much welcome any of you to contribute and share your excellent practice, either via blogs or joining our symposium or joining webinars or becoming part of podcasting. So we have lots and lots of ways in which we can share and showcase your excellent practice. So please do follow that link and let us know, or email me if it's anything related to learning and teaching or assessment practice. And finally, our next webinar in this series is going to be focusing on the flexible learning framework, and that is happening on the 22nd of January. Apologies. We do have the 2 sessions as we have done for today, so we'll have a good range of speakers and hopefully welcome you in this next session that is upcoming after our Christmas break. So I will pause there if anyone has any final thoughts or questions. I can see the chat is still going, so we will be sharing the slides with you and the recording from today's session via email today, and we'll make sure that we've included contact details with the appropriate person. So we do encourage you to carry on and keep those connections happening. Brilliant. Okay, I think we will leave it there if anyone. That's great. Okay, have a very good rest of the day, everyone. And huge thanks to all of our speakers today.